we're delighted to present our first panel discussion at Aries 2020 Virtual Edition. This session, Rebuilding the World Responsibly, will delve into climate-positive ways of construction, innovations in sustainable infrastructure, smart air monitoring systems in buildings, and commitment to ESG, which are environment, social, and governance initiatives. Please welcome our panel moderator, Armelle Le Bihan, founder and Chief Executive Officer of Green Building Consulting and Engineering, and panel speakers, Hasan Tosun, co-founder of SenseGreen, Nicola Crosta, founder of Bondek Foundation, the official ESG partner of the PropertyGuru Asia Property Awards and Asia Real Estate Summit.
Hello, Nicola, and hello, Hasan. Thank you for joining us on this panel today. Before we start, let me just a bit introduce what topics we're going to speak about. Basically, your companies provide quite different products and services. On one hand, you have AI-powered green technology, and on the other, socially responsible programs. But both of you actually serve a particular industry, the built environment, and both of you have a focus on human well-being. Hasan, you focus on occupant well-being and health at a building's operation stage. Nicola, you focus on human well-being and health targeted specifically for children at a building's construction stage. I think this discussion has the potential to be very interesting because you both are providing solutions to improve human welfare, yet at two opposites of the building industry's value chain. And the reason I wanted to point this out is because before we actually start and go more deeper into the conversation is because I believe that bridging the gap between disconnected stakeholders of that value chain is precisely what is needed to both solve direct and indirect issues linked to the built environment. A building is first conceived, it's designed, it's built, and it's used. It involves a lot of people from the very beginning with owners, investors, developers, but also construction sites and then users, and that time frame can be 50 years. Our focus personally is on climate change, and we've seen that for most stakeholders, it's quite difficult to understand big issues when your actual silo or your scope of influence is limited within a certain supply chain. The reality is that, like a lot of problems, whether it is children welfare, air quality, or climate change, these are actually interconnected throughout the building stages, from the very early concept to the end of life. And there's really a need to actually cross collaborations between all these different moments of the building design, building, and operation in order to actually reach any kind of really impactful and meaningful change in the industry. Decarbonizing the built environment actually needs that, but I think I won't be stretching that for the equivalence actually for you as well. Within your sectors and your goals, you also need that kind of collaboration. So this is something I would like for us to talk about and to hear about how each of you actually values collaboration in solving systemic issues here and regionally. But before we go into this, I would like to first speak about both of your specificities and understand a bit better about what you do so we can get this topic actually going. So I'll start with you, Hasan. First question I actually have for you is about your focus. So indoors are often 2 to 5 times more polluted than outdoors, according to a study by EPA. It sounds quite counterintuitive. Could you tell us why indoors are so unhealthy, and why is this your focus at SenseGreen?
Yeah, sure. There are 2 reasons behind. Like I'll answer question first. Like why indoors are actually more pollutant and dangerous than we think. Because outdoors you have a natural climate, you have rain, you have wind, and at some point in the night, city cleans itself, right? Because you have the natural ventilation, you have the rain at most part of the world. But indoors, you have, on the other hand, furnitures, paint, a lot of chemicals, you have printers in the office, you have people breathing in, and if you don't have the natural ventilation, which maybe 99% of the buildings they don't, so it is a problem to control this climate indoors, which can increase the pollutants, which you can't control. Therefore, it ends up being more pollutant and dangerous than the outdoor. And the second part of your question, consider in average time before COVID, which will be similar to like after COVID as well. You spend half of your day at the office, then you go to cinema, you go to gym, you go to shopping in a shopping mall, right? And overall, you spend a lot of your time, maybe 90% of your time indoors. And as a scientist and researchers coming from building sciences background, we wanted to focus on indoors and buildings, mostly commercial buildings. How can we tackle and improve overall well-being of the occupants indoors? And of course, how can we make these places more efficient so they can actually save energy? That's what we do at the sunscreen. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Can you actually tell us what parameters do you measure and how it actually helps to improve indoor environments?
Yeah, sure. We, as a base package, we measure what is most critical, starting from temperature, humidity, pressure. These are, we say, comfort parameters. And on the other side, we have health parameters, carbon dioxide, VOCs, overall like chemicals, and we measure particulate matter from 1 micron up to 10 micron. So that overall, we have an understanding of the health of the facility. But we have a flexible menu on the hardware side. So if a client asks that I want to measure ozone as well, I want to measure formaldehyde, I want to measure like other pollutants, we can add that on our hardware flexibly. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Nicola, I have a question for you as well. Can you tell us why you concentrating on the construction sector and why you have a focus on children specifically?
Yeah, look, it's construction sector is as we all know, is a very important sector of the economies of many countries. If you take a country like Thailand, this is a big sector and it has the specificity of employing a very large part of basically people working in the sectors are migrant labor. And these migrant labor, take the specific example of Thailand, they come to the country with children. Or sometimes they spend many years in the country and they actually give birth to children that are basically start their life and spend many years of their life on construction camps. So the places where these workers are placed while they work in Thailand. We have done a research just a couple of years ago together with UNICEF, where we estimated that in Thailand only you have approximately 60,000 children that live on construction camps. And construction camps, I don't know if you have ever had the chance to, most people have never seen one. Even people working in the construction industry. Construction camps are not a great place to live for children. The houses in which they're built, actually, I wouldn't even call them houses, rooms, are extremely small, very bad quality, no aircon, very hot, very poor hygienic conditions, usually shared bathrooms with not great conditions there either, especially for girls. Very poor illumination at night. So places that are not great places to grow, fairly unsafe. So that's the starting point. And of course, what we are doing is to work with many companies to see how we can improve the conditions of living in these places so that they impact positively the life trajectory of children.
Thank you. It looks like an important mission as well. Maybe you could tell us, like Hasan, what kind of KPIs and system do you have to measure actually your work with them?
Yeah, it's a very important question because you see, in my view, one of the reasons why the conditions of these kids are not great is that I think that for many in these sectors, including companies, there is a will to take some responsibilities, but you don't really know where to start, what to measure, what is it concretely that you should track. And the reality is that the welfare of these kids can be measured. It's not that complicated as long as you have the right framework in place. And this is the reason why, again, in partnership with UNICEF, we have developed something that is called Chiang Mai Framework for Action. It's called this way because it was finalized in the city of Chiang Mai. And it's basically a very simple framework for action that lists 12 points, so 12 things that can be put in place to improve the life of these kids. So there are 12 things across 4 areas. So these things can be put in place and they can be tracked. So to make an example, under the big important area of education, you can measure whether the kids living on this construction site have been connected to a local school and enrolled in school. This is something you can very easily measure. And it's critical to see basically whether they're getting into education, which is going to change completely their life. Under healthcare, you can measure, for instance, how many kids have been vaccinated. So you see, as long as you have a clear framework, it is possible and it is necessary to measure how well or not how good or not is the performance in terms of welfare of these kids on construction camps.
I imagine that involves quite a lot of people in connection with these kids, right?
Yeah, I mean, what we have done is to design tools that make it relatively easy. Because basically what you can do, and this is our modus operandi, is that as a nonprofit, obviously we cannot directly act on every construction camp across Thailand or the region. But what is interesting is that in these construction camps, you already have people that are in charge of the camp, because these are small communities with their own governance system. So what we do, our strategy is basically to help companies instruct and give the right tools to these existing sort of governance infrastructure, so that it integrates good practices that affect children rather than being basically passive about the condition of these children.
Great, thanks. Speaking about collaboration with these construction sites, the construction companies, also property developments, do you also help your own partners in reaching their own KPIs by integrating your social programs?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the key really for us. Again, what we want to see is a problem that is solved by the integration of good practices in companies, not by a non-profit or the government stepping into this. And this is clearly the best way to do it. But I think it's important to realize is that, and to accept, is that this is not the core expertise of a real estate or a construction company when we talk about. So I think it is fair that the sector says, I can do it, but I need the tools. I need to know how to do this kind of thing. So what we have done is we've developed, recently piloted and now developed and ready to launch 2 key documents, tools. One are guidelines. Basically, these are guidelines that explain to those in charge of those construction camps, what is it that you need to do to meet those 12 points, so those 12 requirements. So, for instance, let me make a very concrete example. We have found that for girls living on these camps, it is very important that they have separate showers and they are well illuminated at night, because otherwise there's a ton of bad situations that happen. So you see, in this case, the guidance explain the point. They explain how to build these showers, how to put the illumination. So it's very, very concrete. So companies have the option to just take their list and implement it. And then what we have done is we've developed a self-assessment tool, which is a great tool that basically allows a company to run live surveys on all the construction camps that they work with, and again, leverage their presence in the camp. So basically the person in charge of the camp to just survey the status of those important things, and then to aggregate them basically using a CRM. So basically at the end of the story, if you are sitting in a capital like Bangkok and you know you are responsible for, 25 camps across the country, you can quite effectively track how well or not you're doing across those camps, and just even visualize it in a simple dashboard that tells you, look, in these camps are okay, in these camps we need to act because, the showers are not in place, or the kids are not connected to a local school.
Interesting. It's really good that it's aggregated, because it really allows, I think it's really I would say a value proposition for also these companies to actually integrate your programs, to have something which is transparent across the board of all their projects.
Yeah.
How about moving to you now, Hasan? How about you? I imagine that your role does not just stop at monitoring indoors, and that once you identify some kind of issues, you actually help your stakeholders in resolving these issues. How do you actually collaborate with, for instance, building managers or occupants to improve indoor environments?
Yeah, speaking of transparency, so first of all, let me give you an example. One of our devices, we usually put a QR code on these devices. So no matter whether you are in a shopping mall, in an office, or in a gym, whoever scans the QR code can transparently see overall air quality of the building. So whether this is good, whether this is in standards of WHO or ASHRAE, they can see it. And it's not, it doesn't end there. They can provide feedback, like how do you feel at that specific moment, or do you want anything to be improved? So what we do is we report these feedback to the facility managers and building operators so that they have the chance to manage their properties in an occupant-centric way. So this is the first thing, that we bring occupants and the building together. And it doesn't end there neither, because then you need to actually operate the building, and you need to track whether you are actually improving the facility. So to do so, we are building a marketplace that, as after collecting data a few months, we see maybe these buildings might need some VOC removal. So we connect them with our partner so that they can actually get these services. This can be some sort of maybe duct cleaning. This can be some filter replacement. This can be maybe some air purification service. But we guide them to the exact partner, and with the minimum investment, they can improve their facilities. And since we have the data, we can track the change, whether it really worked or not. So how can we constantly drive the change and improvement? So this is the way how we transform the buildings, building transparency, building a marketplace of partners, and constantly keeping the KPIs and tracking the change of the facilities.
Yeah, I think both of you brought in two interesting points. The first one was about transparency and including stakeholders, so occupants, but the children peer communities, and actually saying what is needed to be addressed within a building or construction site camp, sorry. And on the other end, I think what is interesting to see as well, because a lot of different issues, whether in buildings and construction sites, get measured, get assessed, but then these stakeholders have a big issue in actually implementing or finding solutions for them. But both of you are really taking this towards the really end line, making sure that once they have identified there's an issue, you're actually here to provide a solution for them to actually solve that issue and track progress throughout time. This is what we do as well. And I think it's really interesting to see how across different kind of issues that we want to solve, it's really important to follow through towards the very end if we want to make sure that this action is actually implemented. Speaking about going deeper into the buildings, Hasan, maybe you could tell us a bit more about interrelations between different metrics. If we look at, for instance, the building efficiency, if you want to improve indoor environment quality, air quality, you could, for instance, increase ventilation rates or bring in more outdoor fresh air. But that might have an incidence on energy consumption. Do you measure other factors than air quality? And do you cross-reference data between different KPIs, for instance, comfort and energy, to make better overall building performance?
Yeah, of course. Our vision is to balance the efficiency and well-being. Otherwise, for energy efficiency projects, maybe some retrofit projects, we see that why don't we stop all the ventilation units so that we can save money and energy? It doesn't work that way, and it doesn't work the other way where you have 100% of fresh air all the time. So you need to track the data, and you need to balance the optimum level of ventilation for the health and efficiency of the building. This is what we do. Like, for that reason, we measure 7 different parameters, from temperature to humidity, to spend minimum energy to offer the maximum comfort. This is you can do with the power of data and analytics there.
Speaking about the power of data and the fact that you're dealing with actually physical structures, brick and mortar buildings, how do you manage to overcome some of the physical limitations in existing buildings, which might have old infrastructure, old systems, and old envelopes, to actually improve building performance?
Yeah, what we do on the control side is really important. In a, let's say, sophisticated facility where they have a building management system, you can integrate your data or output into BMS so that you can trigger actions once you have, let's say, a poor indoor air quality, or you detect some overconsumption, let's say overventilation or overcooling for some spaces. You can actually act to stop those. For an old building where you have ACs or some old structure of HVAC units, we're also developing, and we're currently testing this, how we can control a building without a BMS or without a sophisticated system. So we can control the split units, manual, all those old structures. So we can connect them into the cloud and we can automate it. Like, imagine a 30-year-old building that you can automate. You can save huge amount of energy and you can still improve overall well-being. So beyond that, this is also all about tracking the KPIs of your operation. Because most of the time, once we generate an alarm for a specific area, let's say in a room or in a floor, that we've detected an overcooling, if you generate the alarm, you also need to track that whether they actually result of that alarm or not. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the facility managers doing the job or not. So for that reason, transparency is also the key. Like, it's not only about the building the transparency between the occupants, facility managers, but you need to build the transparency for all the stakeholders, from building owner, building operator, and the occupant, so that everyone can see what is going on and who is doing their job accurately or not.
Do you collect, for instance, if there is insufficient air quality levels according to your KPIs, let's say, for instance, too high VOC levels, which is linked to furniture or paint, that you can't really change. Do you collaborate with, for instance, design firms or solution or material providers, so physical, I would say, material providers, to actually help your clients improve their air quality? Yeah.
Overall, VOC is maybe a smaller portion of the entire picture, because we see the most important problem is related to particulate matter, which is, at the end of the day, is connected to filters and also detect some problems you can't solve with the ventilation alone. Then we connect with the appropriate industrial partner. This can improve the VOC removal. In a bank, for instance, we've detected why VOC levels are too high. Okay, we have enough ventilation, we have our systems are quite new and we maintain it well, but we realized they're excessively using perfumes. So we realized that, hey, why don't you either remove those perfumes or reduce the rate of spraying? So it actually worked that you remove the VOC levels just by the power of the data. So it is sometimes without any investment, you can improve what you already have in the facility.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Back to you, Nicola. I wanted to speak about, now that we've been speaking about buildings and operations, going back to construction sites. Well, what kind of challenges do you actually face in implementing your programs? On one end, to get families on board, and on the other, to get construction and property development companies on board. And how do you overcome these issues?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously there are many challenges that you face when you try to implement the kind of programs that we are mentioning. But if we look at it from the perspective that you propose, so engaging families and engaging companies, I would say that engaging families is not really where the biggest challenge is. My experience is that when you bring programs that benefit the children, families, especially families that are very poor, that don't have a lot of opportunities, they recognize an opportunity when they see it. We see, and it's very interesting to see that even a generation of construction workers that they themselves had very little education, that have grown up in very difficult conditions, if they see the possibility for their kids to go into school, to participate to these kind of programs that improve their opportunities for the future, the parents are very supportive. So engaging families is not that difficult. Engaging companies is more difficult, definitely. But I think a good news here is that for some reason, things are changing very significantly in the last few years. I suppose that this has to do with an overall pressure that, as you guys know, we see not only in the construction industry towards social responsibility of companies, more aware consumers and all that. I think these are all big trends that affect all sectors, including the construction sector, that I think finally understands more and more that there is a responsibility that needs to be taken, particularly when you employ a lot of labor force with children involved, not obviously involved in the work, that's pretty rare, but involved in the sense that their living conditions depend on the fact that their parents work in the industry. The key, in my view, there, and that we're working actively on, is that many companies start to see that investing in these kind of social programs that benefit the children of their workers is actually an investment. You see that I'm using the word investment, not donation or charity or anything like that. It is clear, and our model shows it, that companies that take these issues seriously, they get huge benefits. So this is not just the good thing, the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. We see that these companies have less accidents, that they need to then justify and to manage. They have a more stable labor force, because that kind of labor force can very easily migrate to another site or another company for just a little difference of money. If you take care of the children, obviously they have the interest to stay. The company external reputation gets much better, much stronger. And here I'm talking about consumers, I'm talking about local authorities. So really the company reputation is more and more an important asset that CEOs need to look after. And this is affected by their social performance. And then I would say, and this is perhaps a more recent trend, very significant, is the internal reputation. As you know, these companies, they have construction workers, migrant laborers in the field, but they also have a headquarters with a skyscraper in Bangkok or in another capital, with a younger and younger labor force that is much more sensitive to these issues. And today, no young talent wants to work for a bad company. So if you want to attract and retain talent, you better perform on these issues. And I think that companies are starting to value more and more these elements.
It's interesting. Do you actually then provide, I would say, financial translation of social performance to the companies you work with? Do you translate any kind of your metrics into finance metrics?
We are building a model to do that. Sure. It's very complex. So we do have a model, but we want to have a more accurate one. Of course, as you know, when you build these kind of models with so many variables, the question of attribution and, did you have a certain financial advantage as a company as a result, and to what extent it was a result of also taking care of the social aspects? It's not an easy link to build quantitatively. But we have models that I think are sufficiently strong to show those effects, even in just a qualitative method. I mean, companies know their labor force. So that, for instance, reducing turnover is very important. And when you observe that families that are basically of very simple workers, that are relatively happy about the conditions of their children while they work for a company. Their kids, let's suppose they get enrolled into school, they live in a safe environment, they can get vaccinated. They have no interest to migrate to another company or another place. So, we could try to quantify all that, but the qualitative evidence is already there, and it's very convincing, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Hasan? Do you also try to translate environmental performance in either qualitative or quantitative financial metrics?
Yeah, of course. One side we have the energy efficiency. We can directly, let's say, report on the bills, right? But on the other side, you also have overall better quality of the space, which converts a better performance of the employees in a workspace. And indeed, research and academia proves that you can improve up to 20% of your workforce. They can work better in a better environment. So this is, longer term, transforms a financial benefit for the company. And on the other side, you have the ESGs that you offer a better workspace. Then everybody wants to work with you. There's a huge competition on the talent side that nobody, as Nicola stated, wants to work for a company which offers a poor indoor environment, right? So this is a win-win situation for the company, for the energy and well-being side in the short and the long term.
And have you also seen that shift happening as Nicola was describing, companies really wanting to integrate more environmentally responsible tech, for instance?
Yeah, especially after COVID, like COVID accelerated as we see now, especially it's shifted this 2 years back that we now see what we expected to see in 2022. So the competition is more fierce over there.
And I would be curious about both of your opinions on how Thailand stands in regards to other countries in adopting social and environmental sustainable solutions. Do you think it's performing better on par, or do you think it's lagging behind?
Well, this is very different to say in my view, because you should separate probably different issues, and certainly the environmental from the social. But I would say that when we look at particularly at the region of reference, Southeast Asia, I would say Thailand on par, not excelling, but not necessarily being worse than others.
Okay. How about you, Hasan?
Yeah, overall, I would agree with Nicola. I mean, it's getting better, but of course, again, it needs stronger collaboration between the parties, like decision makers and the private sector, to drive the mass transformation.
Okay, and what do you think, Nicola, for you would be needed for it to drive a bigger transformation?
Well, I think that more uptake from companies, the tools now to implement social programs and track them are available, and they haven't been available for a long time, to be fair with the sector. Now they are available, so they have the choice to take action.
Okay, well, great. I have a few last questions on the topic that we've been speaking a lot about recently in the news, COVID, and how that actually affected both of your different activities. I'll start with you, Hasan. There's a quote that I saw on your company's website citing the UK public health, saying that improving indoor air can be as good as vaccinating 50 to 50% of the population. So we know that a lot of super spreader events have happened in closed indoor environments, and this does not give a really super reputation to buildings. And a lot of discussions have been questioning ventilation levels, but also air filters, water flows, indoor materials. In your opinion, do you think buildings are fit today to deliver healthier environments? And if not, how can buildings in the design and operations play a role to mitigate COVID transmission?
Yeah, overall, I would say with one example, like buildings are not safe or becoming safe. Even the humidity levels, if you keep the humidity between 40 to 60%, you reduce the risk of transmission up to 5 times. Or imagine the perfume example I gave you, right? You use perfume and those particles, they actually carry the virus. It increases the transmission risk. So no perfume, maybe no transmission. So there's a way that you can balance that overall health is partially related to COVID, but before COVID or after COVID, we should still question the building health overall. And I see that there's a trend coming for building health as it came for building efficiency and energy saving in the last decade. And this decade, we expect to see more incentives, maybe financing schemes for building retrofitting towards efficiency on one side, but also now concerning the health. So the government, private industry again should collaborate that we need to convert our buildings in a mass scale. And in new projects, like new constructions, I see this is going to be more stricter compared to the previous buildings that we built. But the existing building stock, which is like the 99%, then the retrofitting now, they need to consider more and more overall occupant health and the building health itself. Because in the balance sheet, they see in the longer term, they better off, they have better workforce. In a shopping mall example, they have more visitors. In a hospital, they have overall a shorter time of treatment, which is, improving all of their KPIs. So they will now have to consider this and the long-term benefit.
It's interesting. This is something that we've seen as well in design, that there's a shift between even certifications. A lot of certifications before were really focused on energy efficiency, and now it's really going on human well-being, air quality, comfort, even water quality, etc. So even before COVID, there was already this transition from, I would say, a non-human kind of aspect to a more human aspect in buildings. So I think COVID was just going to push this further because it kind of has to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what about you, Nicola? I imagine that it has been quite tough to deal with COVID and to prevent kind of COVID transmission within campsites. Have you been able to put precautions in place? Was it difficult? And how were you able to manage this while still providing children's welfare?
Yeah, look, I think that some countries, in particular Thailand, have been particularly successful in preventing the diffusion of the pandemic in their territory, including in migrant communities. So that, and we have seen in the construction sector, many companies actually moving quite fast in putting in place simple but quite effective measures, like, for instance, creating zones for self-quarantine of workers that were not feeling well, or distributing more sort of materials to increase hygiene and all of that. So on the health side, things so far have worked out pretty well in Thailand. What I think it's important to keep in mind is the economic impact of the pandemic. On that type of population, in particular migrant workers, construction sector, we have seen a very, very rapid deterioration of their, because of less income. I personally, more than 15 years, I've supported these communities. I have never seen hunger, and I have seen it in the last few months in children. So that's something that unfortunately has happened. And again, we are collaborating with companies to try and manage it, and hopefully in a few months things will go back to normal.
Yeah, hopefully it will. I imagine it must be tough. Well, thank you very much. Is there, we're at the end now of this panel discussion, and is there anything else that you want to add to the subject? Or do you want to conclude? Or do you think we went through everything we could?
Not from me. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Hasan?
thank you. It was a great session. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Great. I enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much for being here, and looking forward to meet in person.
Bye-bye. Looking forward. Bye-bye.